Coming up on Jerusalem Dateline, Prime Minister Netanyahu goes to Washington. A look at the goals shared by Israel and the U.S. and the unique challenges each wants hammered out. Plus, the great divide between military elites and the government. Amiad Cohen from the Center for Israeli Liberty breaks down how those differences have affected how Israel fights its wars. All this and more coming up on this edition of Jerusalem Dateline. Hello and welcome to this edition of Jerusalem Dateline. I'm Chris Mitchell. Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu is now in Washington for his meetings with President Donald Trump at the White House. On the docket are critical discussions about issues affecting the Middle East, from Gaza to Iran to the fate of the remaining hostages. Here's the latest. Before he left for the U.S., Netanyahu told reporters some of the issues the two leaders will discuss.
Victory over Hamas, achieving the release of all our hostages, and dealing with the Iranian terror axis and all its components, an axis that threatens the peace of Israel, the Middle East, and the entire world.
Netanyahu says he believes the two can transform the Middle East.
I believe that we can strengthen security, broaden the circle of peace, and achieve a remarkable era of peace through peace.
Trump also extended an invitation to King Abdullah of Jordan to the White House. Trump wants Jordan and Egypt to help resettle Palestinian refugees from Gaza so it can be rebuilt. So far, both countries are rejecting Trump's offer.
We have a clear vision regarding the reconstruction of the Gaza Strip without this leading to the expulsion of any citizen from his land. We have a clear vision in this regard.
On Saturday, Hamas released 3 more hostages. Israelis were delighted to see the reunions of Yarden Bibas, Ofer Calderon, and Israeli-American Keith Siegel. These men and the other released hostages described the hellish conditions Hamas kept them in for more than 15 months. Some were held in cages and without medical care. Others saw friends murdered or die slowly. Some were forbidden to cry or hold hands with other hostages. A member of the IDF Medical Corps said some were held in Hamas tunnels for up to 8 months straight, without daylight and little human contact. Yarden Bibas says Hamas taunted him about the fate of his wife Shiri and the 2 sons, Ariel and Kafir. Israel says it has grave concerns about whether they are still alive. Former hostage Daniela Gilboa posted on social media, "I knew the only thing that could save us was faith." She waited for the moment she could recite the prayer of thanksgiving in her synagogue. President Trump's envoy Steve Witkoff met with some of the released hostages.
People of the United States stand with you. The President stands with you. And we have a common goal to bring everybody home.
Some were also held in United Nations Relief and Works Agency facilities. Israel has now banned UNRWA activities in Israel. It's Israel's most extensive action against the UN agency yet. CBN News has reported for years how UNRWA's curriculum teaches generation of Palestinian children to fight for Israel's destruction. The war in Gaza also exposed the incestuous relationship between UNRWA and the terror group Hamas, where many UNRWA employees work for Hamas and shared UNRWA facilities. The ceasefire and hostage release deal between Hamas and Israel will be a main topic for the two leaders. Before reporters in the Oval Office, President Trump said he's not sure the ceasefire with Hamas will hold up.
I have no assurances that it'll hold. I mean, I've seen people brutalized. Nobody's ever seen anything like it. No, I have no guarantees that the peace is going to hold.
The president asked his Middle East envoy, Steve Witkoff, about the deal.
It's holding so far. So we're certainly hopeful, and that's the president's direction. Get the hostages out, save lives, and come to hopefully a peaceful settlement of it all. So far it's holding.
Some Israelis are hopeful with President Trump in office. It might be an opportune time to declare sovereignty over Israel's biblical heartland in the area known as the West Bank. Asked if he supported Israel annexing that region, Trump said he wouldn't talk about that, while explaining how the Jewish state is a tiny nation in the region.
It's a small country in terms of land. See this pen, this wonderful pen? My desk is the Middle East, and this pen, the top of the pen, that's Israel. That's not good, right? You know, it's a pretty big difference.
Trump has repeatedly advocated for Palestinians in Gaza to be relocated to Egypt, Jordan, or other countries, either temporarily or permanently, while Gaza is rebuilt, an idea Arab nations are rejecting. Trump will also view the 47-minute raw video of Hamas's massacre on October 7th. The Prime Minister's office announced Netanyahu will extend his trip through Saturday because of the many requests for meetings. Monday night, he met with Christian leaders in a meeting hosted by Governor Mike Huckabee, who, if confirmed, will be the next U.S. ambassador to Israel. House Speaker Mike Johnson also announced Netanyahu will meet with congressional leaders, who stated, "We need to be supporting Israel right now as strongly as ever." And Politico reports Trump is set to sign an executive order defunding the United Nations Relief and Works Agency, UNRWA. And the Wall Street Journal says the White House has asked congressional leaders to approve a $1 billion military aid package to Israel, including 1,000-pound bombs and heavy equipment. Meanwhile, a Palestinian terror attack today at an Israeli base left a number of injured. It comes as IDF forces are engaged in an operation called Iron Wall to rid terror groups inside Palestinian cities like Jenin and Nablus. And in the aftermath of the war with Hamas, a new poll shows 71% of Israelis oppose the establishment of a Palestinian state in Judea and Samaria, while 68% support declaring sovereignty there. And one issue the two leaders are certain to discuss is Iran. The New York Times reports new intelligence reveals Iran is looking to accelerate the timeline for producing a nuclear weapon. Coming up, keeping his eyes on the prize, analysis about Benjamin Netanyahu's objectives for his U.S. trip. Welcome back to Jerusalem Dateline. I'm joined here in our studio with John Waage, CBN senior editor. John, it's hard to overestimate the importance of the visit today between Prime Minister Netanyahu and President Trump. What are your thoughts?
Yeah, it's interesting, Chris. The day has now stretched into virtually a week. And this coming on the heels of so much uncertainty with the hostages, Hamas, all those things. And then this meeting happened. And it's just a dramatic change from even a year ago. I mean, look back 1 year. They were trying, the Biden administration was trying to, and verbally saying Netanyahu needed to be ousted from power and the Israelis needed to take care of that. I mean, the world was calling for Netanyahu. The Senate Majority Leader, who's now no longer the Senate Majority Leader, was calling for his ouster. And now he's there for a week of planning on what looks like it's going to be a new Middle East. And that's remarkable.
He's already met with some Christian leaders. He's meeting with House Speaker Mike Johnson this coming Thursday. It's really kind of a whirlwind and such a dramatic change.
It really is. And you know, the focus has been, and rightfully so, on the hostages for much of the last 16 months. But really, what's coming up is possibly a sea change in the Middle East, because the old traditions of the last 70 years, the old demands made by the international community, are starting to kind of crumble and fall under this Trump administration. And it's going to be really interesting to see how much they make public now and how much they're following according to a plan that is outlined over the next several months and years.
Yeah, your reference to decades would be part of the Oslo Accords,
absolutely.
A two-state solution. But you've got a Bible there where the Bible talks different things about the borders of Israel.
It does, Chris. And it really struck me, you know, in the 15th chapter of Joshua, it's listing the boundaries of Israel. And that in itself is remarkable, because you're talking about the only nation on earth that has clearly delineated borders, boundaries in the Scripture from the Lord. And there's a list of dozens of towns and villages allotted just to the tribe of Judah, which is one of the 12 tribes of Israel. And in verse 47, it says that Judah will receive Ashdod with its towns and villages, Gaza with its towns and villages, as far as the brook of Egypt and the great sea with its coastline. Now, that territory, which Israel won in 1967, when they fought the war against Egypt, Syria, and all the combined Arab armies, they took over clear to the brook of Egypt. They took a huge portion of the Sinai, which was given back in the 1977 Accords, the peace treaty with Egypt. But Israel has tried to give back the land. They tried to give back Gaza in 2005 and got a terrorist mini-state with rockets for the next 16, 17, 18, 19 years. So we may be seeing a change based on what we saw President Trump this week talking about how small Israel is and how they've accomplished so much with such a small territory. He's driving home the point that Gaza may not necessarily be somewhere where these terrorists need to be planted for the foreseeable future. And of course that turns on its head the whole concept of the Oslo land for peace, two states side by side living in peace and security. We haven't had that for the last 50 years, and it sounds like they may be thinking about trying something new. Yeah, because right now President Trump is advocating the idea that maybe these Palestinians need to go to Egypt or Jordan or some other nation. It's getting pushback from some of these Arab nations, Hamas obviously and the Palestinian Authority, but it's on the table. Right. Just 2 weeks ago, it was a non-starter. You couldn't even bring that up, but he keeps bringing it up. So it becomes part of the discussion, part of the negotiations, and we'll see where it goes from there. But one thing that Israel has made clear, and even Israeli public opinion polls have made clear, is that Israel is not going to accept what happened before 16 months ago, where the children and families under rocket fire for 20 years. They're not going back to that. I think there's a new poll out that says 70-some% of Israelis will not have a Palestinian state in Judea and Samaria. They have hardened their position based on what has happened over the last 20 years here. Yeah, no going back after that. No going back. Majority of Israelis right now, according to that same poll you referenced, is they want to declare sovereignty over Judea and Samaria. That's a sea change as well. That is, absolutely. Some of the biblical heartland of Israel. There's never been a more important time to pray not only for the peace of Jerusalem, but for all of Israel and what happens next. Great points, John. Thanks so much.
Still ahead, clashing values. Amiad Cohen on the differing approaches to conflict held by Israel's generals versus its elected leaders. Much has come out in recent months about the differences in the IDF's and the Israeli government's approaches to war. Amiad Cohen from the Center for Israeli Liberty spoke with us about this. Here's an excerpt from our conversation on what's next in Gaza. At least temporarily, does this ceasefire go counter to the goals of the war, which is the first two, to defeat Hamas militarily and to make sure it doesn't govern Gaza after the war?
Of course, the ceasefire is counter to these two objectives of the war. But you need to understand, as Clausewitz says in his book, military power is the continuation of diplomacy or policy in different ways. You need to use military power to gain assets. But the second the military objective you don't achieve them with using military power. You move back to diplomacy, reorganize your army, and then use that again to try again.
You were talking about the differences between the IDF leadership and the political leadership. Has that been going on since the beginning of the war? Can you describe a little bit more that dynamic between these two goals or two kind of philosophies of conducting the war?
Yeah, so it's actually started in the mid-90s when the IDF totally embraced the Oslo Accords and saw that as a strategy to separate between Israel and the Palestinians. Tactically, obviously, that solution never succeeded, and we had all the uprising, intifadot from the mid-'80s till 2015, and having many terror attacks inside Israel. But the leadership of the IDF thought that that's the best strategy to achieve, let's say, victory against our enemies, only with appeasement and peace accords. On the other hand, the political leadership in Israel, run by Netanyahu and basically the right, is opposed to these agreements. What happened in this war, that conflict came to a collision in the strategy of the war from day one. The IDF was not built in the right way to have an offensive in two fronts, in Lebanon and in Gaza, in parallel. The IDF was not built by the generals of the IDF to have enough ground troops and infantry and armed forces to invade and destroy the Gaza Strip. That's one of the reasons we were stuck with the lack of ammunition, the lack of mortars, the lack of 155 artillery shells, the lack of Air Force strikes, because no one planned in the IDF to have a real offensive attack to occupy territory inside Lebanon and the Gaza Strip. So it actually disabled Netanyahu and the political echelon to actually have to make some decisions. On the first week of the war, there was a debate between the IDF and the Prime Minister where to attack the Gaza Strip or Lebanon, and the Prime Minister decided to start with Gaza and then go to Lebanon. But if you know a little bit about Israeli national security, the orders from the government to the IDF is to be able to have two fronts of offensive attacks of the IDF, which we didn't have on October 7th. I hope the new general in the IDF now, the new leadership, which I hope will be appointed in the next couple of weeks, will be from a new generation of leaders in the IDF, which are rising from a more conservative right-wing leadership that is much more hawkish than the progressive elite we have with IDF, from Herzi Halevi to Kochavi to Benny Gantz to Gadi Eisenkot. All of them, their strategy are appeasement and minimizing the military force and using only special ops. The next generation, I hope, will be more classical warfare that understands you need to destroy the enemy till the end, to the total victory.
Yeah. Well, also, you know, Amiad, that President Trump has appointed Stephen Witkoff for his mediator in Gaza, and now with Iran. Do you see there sort of a difference in philosophy with Witkoff and some of the other members of the Trump administration now, Marco Rubio, Governor Huckabee, Mike Waltz?
So it depends. Each one of them is a little bit different, and we need to give them some time to prove themselves. I don't know Witkoff, and definitely not in person, and I don't know what he thinks and how he thinks. So time will tell how he thinks. But we need to understand, Israel is an independent state that has its own interests that do not align 100% with the American ones. And this is what Prime Minister Netanyahu and the Israeli leadership need to understand. We need to act only on Israeli interest and have a conversation with the American interest too, that not align 100%, but we need to have a good conversation. On the other hand, America needs to understand that they cannot force Israel to, let's say, go against its existential needs. And that's what Biden did, and forced the IDF in Israel to go against the Biden administration by attacking against its advice and, let's say, the orders that they gave Israel. Israel needs to become an independent state in that aspect too. And I think I can trust Witkoff, Trump, and all the people surrounding Trump to respect Israel's sovereignty.
When we return, discussing this unique moment in Israel's history with Hanna Ben Haim. Whenever our friend Hanna Ben Haim comes through the studio, it's always an opportunity to get a bead on how Israelis are feeling. Right now, with the hostage release and the prisoner release, it's a very mixed bag. Hanna Ben Haim, great to be with you here in our studio again.
So good to be back here.
Tell us your sense of where Israel is at right now. There's so many things going on. What's the heartbeat of Israel right now?
We're in the most critical moment I think we've ever been in. You know, we're still in this war, and we are now in an agreement to get our hostages back. Everyone in the world knows that, I think. And we are getting this trickle of live hostages, praise God. But at the same time, we're filling our streets with murderers who are bent on murdering again. And that's the proof. And so we're taking a very dangerous step. The world doesn't understand that this agreement is in many ways like a death blow to us, as far as the victory of this war, and also as far as what is the future in these places that are being filled with terrorism.
We know historically when terrorists are released like that, they go and commit more terror attacks.
60% of them will return to do terror attacks, yeah.
And yet Israel's agreed to this. Why would Israel agree to this?
For one reason, we love life. And, you know, all the commandments can be broken if you save a life in Judaism. So life is the supreme goal of everything. And as a people, what we want to do is preserve life. Now, a lot of people don't notice that and don't see it that way. Look what's happened in Gaza. But the idea is we don't want to destroy people. We're not out to destroy people. We want to preserve life.
And yet Hamas seems to be stringing this along. And what was October 7th in the minds of Hamas? Have they got to this point because of what they did on October 7th?
Absolutely. October 7th, everything about October 7th was getting to this moment. And this is a moment of victory for Hamas. The whole point was to get the hostages. It wasn't that they had to build cages in those underground dungeons. It was already. They had it all prepared. The whole point was to come in, get as many hostages and bodies as they could, hold us ransom, take us to the edge of this moment, and then get them released from our prisons, those people who are living because they want to see Israel destroyed and the Jewish people killed. So they're standing on a heap of rubble with their victory sign, because for them, this is the outcome of October 7th. This is it.
Is it because they know Israel's greatest strength is to love life, but also, in their view, a great weakness?
For them, they look at it as our greatest weakness, but actually, from God's point of view, what does He give us more than anything? Is life. He wants to give us eternal life. So we're on the side of the Holy One of Israel, who wants to preserve life. Although there are times we have got to fight, because there is a time for war, and this is definitely one of those times.
So for people looking from the outside, how do you give them the perspective they need from a biblical perspective, and how can people pray at this time?
Well, we're in a very critical moment. As you know, Bibi is in America, our prime minister, and he's being pressured by everything and everyone, I am sure. God has put something in Bibi that's really like flint. And so he has an object. You know, he has been speaking about this access of power from Iran for 30 years. In addition to that, we have to pray for those hostages that are still hanging in the balance. We don't know if they're really alive. We don't really know. We don't have their names. You know, Hamas is not forthcoming in any of this information, besides which, who can believe Hamas for anything at this point, really? You think they're going to tell us the truth, you know, when they want to destroy us? So pray for the hostages, pray for this continuation that they will be released, and that we will know what is right to do in this hour. And for the unity of the people. The unity of the people. We have been so shredded by these 15 months of war, haven't we?
Yeah, yeah.
So I think those are three very important points.
Great perspective, Hanna Ben Haim. Great fodder for prayer. Thanks so much for being with us.
My pleasure.
Well, that's all for this edition of Jerusalem Dateline. Thanks for joining us. Remember, you can follow us on social media and access CBN content through our CBN News and other CBN apps. And be sure to sign up for our email blasts so you can keep up with breaking news. And please keep praying for the peace of Jerusalem and the protection of all of Israel, and for the successful release of more hostages. May the rest of them come home soon. And for all of us here at the Jerusalem Bureau, I'm Chris Mitchell. We'll see you next time on Jerusalem Dateline.